Chapter 1. Magical Birth. Eli Evans rooted his head firmly against the seatback of a plush recliner in his Boeing 722 jet. He had hoped to be able to catch some shut-eye on the 6-hour flight to Brownsville, Oregon from New York City, but he knew any efforts to relax would be futile. "I'm about to be a father," he thought with exhilaration. All of the hours he'd spent in meditation, envisioning himself calm and grounded for this moment, seemed in vain. The mixture of excitement, anxiety, and pride he'd felt when first hearing the news of Angelina's pregnancy had now evolved into a full-on panic in anticipation of the birth. "I'll feel better when I'm there," he repeated to himself. In the meantime, he succumbed to visions of worst-case scenarios that now took on a whole different level of meaning as a soon-to-be father. What if the plane crashes and I never meet my child? What if there are complications during the delivery that our midwife isn't prepared to handle and the baby doesn't make it? Or Angelina? Or what if everything with the delivery goes fine, but our child has a rare deformity, a third eye or something? Eli chuckled at the last thought. We should all be so lucky. He'd been trying to cultivate a greater awareness of his own invisible third eye since having his attention brought to its existence a few years before. What a ride this has been! Eli welcomed the distraction a sudden flood of memories gave him from his anxiety. Knowing that Angelina, the woman he loved more than he believed to be humanly possible, was at his childhood home in Brownsville, Oregon, along with his mother and grandmother, caused a wide smile to grace his harried face. He couldn't wait to arrive at the farm he'd grown up on. Too bad my dad can't be there, he thought regrettably, at least not in physical form. Neither of Angelina's parents would be there either, he realized, but that was by choice rather than impossibility. Eli had never met them nor spoken to them on the phone, even though they lived not far from their home in Los Angeles. Angelina never told him much about them either, save for the fact that her father was Indian and her mother American. He'd seen photos of them wearing turbans. She'd also told him that her young adulthood had been somewhat traumatic. She'd lived with her parents at an ashram where her parents still lived and where she'd had an enjoyable and educational youth, but uncomfortable teenage years. She'd shared that she'd left the ashram at the age of 18 in order to avoid an arranged marriage. That's all he knew. Angelina had called the ashram to notify her parents of her pregnancy several months before, but her news had been met with disdain. "We have no interest in meeting that child," her father had said. Her mother remained quiet, adhering to her husband's response. Their reaction had broken Angelina's heart and bewildered Eli, who had grown up in an extremely loving and supportive environment. "Why are they so upset with you? How can they not be happy for you?" he'd asked after she hung up. "It's complicated," was Angelina's reply. "Yes, that much I gather. But for a religion that teaches the spiritual truths about love that you still practice today, aren't they being contradictory and quite harsh?" "A lot of the Guru's teachings I still hold as my truth, and my parents do as well. But there are other philosophies that have been construed to meet his foundation's agenda." "Which is?" "Well, let's just say it's a male-dominated religion. Like most religions, they are heavily concerned with growing their community, so their agenda upholds that intention. Men are given certain liberties that women are not." "Like what?" "Do we have to talk about this now?" Angelina had become noticeably stressed. Eli did not want to add further discomfort to what had already been an emotional day. "No, love, of course not. I didn't mean to push you." He wrapped his arms around her and cradled her head in his hands like he would a child, for in her eyes he saw for the first time the look of a wounded child. I love you," he whispered, "and I love this child growing inside of you." Angelina wiped away a tear that had started to form in her eye. "I love you too." Eli knew how blessed he'd been to have the parents he had. They'd raised him to know the value of hard work, to notice patterns in nature, and they had cultivated within him a passion for music. Both of his parents had been amateur musicians who had played in a folk band around Oregon. Eli grew up on stage. He was a natural musician and performer, but his parents had given him the opportunity to study advanced guitar and compose his own music when his homework and chores were completed. He was always a daydreamer and often complained in response to the farm tasks his parents had given him. But as an adult, Eli came to understand those responsibilities were critical in building the work ethic and stamina needed to reach the level of career success he'd reached. "They made me a rock star." He emitted a sigh of disbelief. He'd never wanted to climb the corporate ladder. All he'd ever wanted to do was play music, but it still shocked him that he'd made it as far as he had. "I was born to perform," he reflected, "and to raise the consciousness of the planet, and maybe even beyond." His thoughts started to drift back to the last conversation he'd had with Michael. "Oh my God, that must have been 8 months ago," Eli thought. "How could so much time have passed without a visit?" Over the past few years, he'd reached out regularly to Michael, and Michael, of course, had often shown up unexpectedly. He was there whenever Eli had needed guidance. "I guess I got so swept up in preparing for the baby," he realized. And maybe Michael wanted to allow me that time with Angelina. He always has his reasons." The thought of the baby jolted Eli back to the present. "God, the baby! I hope I'm not too late." He hadn't anticipated going back to Brownsville for another 2 weeks. The plan was to drive Angelina up to his mother's home from L.A. 1 month before her late May due date, so she could relax in his mother's care and be near their midwife, Susie, the same woman who had helped his mother give birth to him. Eli was to meet Angelina there 2 weeks later, after completing his East Coast tour, the last stretch of road gigs before the 3-month paternity leave he'd built into his schedule. But nature had other plans. Only 3 days after leaving Angelina at the farm and 1 day into his tour, his mother called to let him know Angelina was going into early labor. "This baby is eager to enter the world," Carol had said, after assuring him that being born early wasn't necessarily cause for concern. She told him he'd better forget about the rest of his tour and get back on the plane. She spoke with a collected calm, but a sense of urgency. His manager would not be happy, but he'd long ago given up prioritizing profit over self-care and family time. "My fans will understand," he thought. He had taken long stretches of time off in the past, and his fans had always come back. Besides, he wanted to lead by example. Everyone should follow their hearts and take care of themselves and their loved ones first, even rock stars. "And actresses," Eli added. He was proud of the way Angelina had prioritized self-care during her pregnancy, even while at the height of her acting career. "My girl is in shape," he thought proudly. She had the typical pregnancy cravings, especially for ice cream, but she knew it wasn't the ice cream itself that her body craved. It was something sweet and creamy. She kept yogurt and kefir and fresh strawberries on hand to quench the craving when it arose. Naturally, she kept up her yoga practice. She made the necessary adjustments to accommodate her growing belly, but he was amazed at her strength and dedication to a consistent practice. Throughout the pregnancy, Eli and Angelina kept a nightly ritual of meditating together. Even if one of them was away, they joined together over the phone and set intentions for the child they were about to raise. They envisioned a healthy, strong baby. It didn't matter which gender. They wanted to be surprised. They asked for guidance in recognizing what the child's unique talents were so that they could nurture them. Every baby is born with a purpose, they'd acknowledge. Remind us that the universe knows better than us what that is, so that we may surrender to it and not resist. Surrender. Eli reminded himself now, 4 hours before landing, that he couldn't control the outcome. He pictured himself at the farm, cradling his newborn baby in one arm and Angelina in the other, as his mother and grandmother looked on. That was the image that finally allowed him to fall asleep. Eli awoke with a jolt. "What was that?" he said aloud, having forgotten he was on a plane. "It was just the plane landing, sir. You had fallen into a deep sleep," Sarah, his flight attendant, answered. "Are we in Brownsville?" Eli rubbed his eyes and looked out the window. "Yes, we are, sir." Eli was used to flying into Eugene, Oregon, and driving the remaining 30 minutes to Brownsville, but special arrangements had been made to land at a small, private airport near Brownsville in order to save time. Sometimes it paid to be famous. Eli hurriedly reached for his phone and turned the power back on. Several text message alerts went off. His eyes scanned the messages from his mother, his fingers scrolling down until he reached the last one, sent only 7 minutes earlier. "Angelina is a champion. 8 hours into labor now. Baby is getting closer." "I haven't missed the birth yet," he exclaimed, reaching for his bag and rushing to the door. "Go, Eli, go!" Sarah and Tim, the pilot, cheered him on after it was safe to exit the plane. A driver stood ready, the door to his black Toyota Camry open. He threw Eli's bags into the trunk of the car and drove his anxious passenger the remaining 4 minutes to the farm, breaking a few minor traffic laws along the way. As they pulled up the familiar driveway, Eli warned, "I'm getting out here. Pull over. Pull over." The driver knew better than to argue and quickly brought the car to a halt. Eli threw open the door and ran the remaining 200 feet to the house, ignoring the fact that he would have arrived at the door faster had he stayed in the car. "Eli!" He already saw his mother open the front door. "Hurry!" There was no time for social formalities. He quickly squeezed his mother's hand as he charged past her, following the sounds of Angelina's moans. The first-floor den had been converted into a nursery. Plants hung from the ceiling and sat in pots on the windowsill. A stream of sunlight stretched across the creaky wooden floor. A wooden crib was in one corner, a changing table in another, and a daybed along the wall. In the center of the room, Angelina sat in an inflatable pool of water, her arms behind her on either side, bracing her body against the pool walls. Eli couldn't tell if she was covered in water or sweat. Susie, the midwife, stood behind her, massaging her neck and shoulders, but Eli paid her no mind as he rushed to Angelina's side and began kissing her face all over. My love, I'm here. I'm here. That's my beautiful, strong woman." Angelina smiled, breathing deeply. "I'm so glad you're here." "She's been wonderful, Eli." He finally noticed his grandmother, quietly seated in a chair in the corner. In her hands was an open book. "Oma, hello," he smiled. "Hello, dear. I've just been reading your Angelina some poetry. I read from this same book after your mother gave birth to you." Eli looked back at his mother. There was so much history in this room. "It's true. I remember." She smiled, reaching for the tincture of cramp bark and chamomile that Susie had made for Angelina. "Here you go, dear." She held the mug to her daughter's lips. "How are you, my love?" Eli looked imploringly at Angelina. "Tired," she winked. "Of course. Can I do anything to help?" Angelina's face winced as a contraction came. "What's happening? Is the baby coming?" Eli started to panic again. "Relax, Eli. We've got this." His mom grinned. His grandmother started to hum a song he'd remembered her singing when he was a child. The midwife guided her arms gently up and down Angelina's back, and his mother laid a cold compress on Angelina's forehead. The contraction resided. 5 minutes. his mother said. 5 minutes until birth? Eli asked. The contractions are 5 minutes apart. Angelina looked at him curiously. Don't you remember anything from birthing class? She teased. Eli was grateful she felt well enough to still have her sense of humor. That must have been the week I missed. Eli winked. Just then, a car could be heard coming up the driveway. Are we expecting someone? Eli asked, gesturing toward the window. Maybe. His mother smiled and winked at Angelina and Eli's grandmother before rising to greet their guest. Angelina looked hopeful. Eli felt as though he'd been left out of a secret. He kissed Angelina on top of her head before rising to see who was at the door. Welcome. Please come in. He watched his mother warmly embrace a slender woman wearing a white dress and turban with a green shawl draped over her shoulders. She was light-skinned. He guessed the color of her hair to be a light brown. Her eyes, however, were the color of coffee. Pure Angelina. Angelina's mother, Eli thought. His mouth gaped open. The woman shyly entered the room, eagerly searching for her daughter. Is she okay? She asked, her voice crackling slightly with nervousness. Yes, Angelina is well. She is dilated at 7 centimeters. Contractions are 5 minutes apart now. As if on cue, Angelina could be heard releasing a moan, guiding her mother to the nursery, just as she'd guided Eli. My baby. Angelina's mother's eyes welled up, as did her daughter's, as she gently approached the pool. Mother. Angelina choked on the word, overcome with emotion. I'm so glad you're here. The baby is almost ready. She squeezed her mother's hand. Eli's gaze bounced from Angelina to his mother, his grandmother, and finally their guest. Who had arranged this? He wondered. It didn't matter so much now, he realized. Elizabeth. He stood to greet her. It is a pleasure to meet you. I'm Eli. Elizabeth turned toward Eli, her hands together in prayer. She nodded slowly, silently. If it weren't for the small smile across her face, Eli would have wondered if their meeting was in fact a pleasure. She seemed to want to reach out to him, but something was holding her back. She turned her attention back to Angelina. We are all here, Angelina spoke quietly, holding eye contact with her mother. The thought crossed Eli's mind that not only was his father not present after his death nearly a year before, but Angelina's father wasn't there either. To his love, however, it was clear that those she had needed to be present were. The pain Angelina had been in with each contraction seemed to lessen in intensity. The presence of her mother calmed her. What happened next was a blur. Eli went from confusion and surprise to exhilaration. Angelina breathed deeply and barely released a sound as she gave one giant push and out from the water, gently pulled their child. My baby, Angelina cried, repeating the words her mother had just said to her. She held the newborn up to her chest. It's a boy, she sobbed. A son! I have a son. Eli released his own tears of joy. He shared a knowing glance at Angelina that confirmed their baby now had a name. The midwife wrapped a towel around the baby, who let out a small cry, and placed him upright against Angelina's bare chest. Eli reached for the boy's tiny, delicate hand. Hello, little Gabriel. He kissed his forehead. You're okay. We love you. Eli turned to Angelina in amazement. You did it, baby. I love you so much. You are amazing. Eli could feel he had just been witness to the sacredness of the feminine. Around him were 5 powerful, spiritual, and wise women whose bodies and spirits knew how to create, nurture, and deliver the precious gift of new life. They knew so much more than him, he realized. I can never know what they know. He missed his father, but he knew he had witnessed what just happened too. Looking into his baby boy's eyes, he recalled what his father's spirit had once told him. I chose you to be my son, just as you chose me to be your father. We all have that choice before a baby is conceived. We chose each other. We are soulmates. Don't you see?" "Yes, I chose you." Eli looked into the squinting eyes of his child. "Thank you for choosing me. I promise you I will do everything in my power to make the world you were just born into the best that it can be."